Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're having a good day. So today we're going into controversial territory a little bit. We want to talk a little bit about a recent interview Craig Wright did with Valuetainment and Craig Wright being Satoshi. Going to also talk about another controversial topic a little bit, Hexcoin being the new Bitcoin. And of course, we'll talk a little bit about our project Bitcoin MYK. But Craig Wright, the most hated man in cryptocurrency, most hated man to the Bitcoin maximalists, recently did this interview, and we saw Craig Wright come out and do many interviews, and in many cases, his arguments not hold up the greatest. And in such events, has led many in the space to walk around, totally dismiss Craig Wright, as again this scammer, as it were, this person that people despise, disrupting the Bitcoin narrative. So we're going to talk about why this interview, I think, although it addressed many of the same stories we've heard about Craig Wright, what I think was some significant points about this one, and why I think as time goes on, a lot of more details are adding up about Craig Wright. But we're not only going to just talk about that, we're going to talk about maybe how we look at cryptocurrency, how we should see cryptocurrency, and the reality of why we're here and what's happening here. So Craig Wright went on to talk about some of the early days of Bitcoin, right? And many of us weren't around during this period, as there's a lot of new people in cryptocurrency, a lot of younger people. But I was one of those people who were around in the early 2000s, the late 90s, who remember systems like eGold, right? Which were basically these electronic payment systems. And so many believe, Bitcoin is pretty much this continuation of many of earlier systems that address similar ideas. And, of course, the idea was at this time that Bitcoin, when it was first created, was this digital internet money, right? It was the money of the internet. And that's pretty much how it was described. I believe Satoshi's exact words, and let me see if I can quote them here, was something like, "I've developed a new open source peer-to-peer e-cash system called Bitcoin." Now, what do you do with an e-cash system, right? This is some type of payment system. And this is what created a lot of the division in the forking of Bitcoin, from Bitcoin Cash to the latest Bitcoin, Satoshi's vision, or the biggest of the more significant Bitcoin forks that became billion-dollar cryptocurrency projects, right? People like Craig Wright, Roger Ver. So why does this all matter? Well, I guess if we make a comparison to something like a religion, like say Christianity, where the prophet, as it were, the deity, as it were, has given you information, then you would always go back to what the deity himself wanted his system to become. If you try to create another use for a system or make another system outside of the design of the creator himself, then you can start to get issues, you start to get problems. This is part of the issue with Bitcoin, where through some later continuation, Bitcoin becomes what is essentially a store of value in concept. Store of values throughout history have had a successful run as a form of money. In the paradigm of Bitcoin, what you had was a direct leap to store value and a failed project as a currency, right? And there's many reasons why that is we can get into. But Bitcoin just hasn't been well received by everyone, the masses of people. And we've continued to fight with the value of Bitcoin, although it has done a if you're an early on person in Bitcoin, a tremendous job in getting to 1,000,000% returns, 2,000,000% returns since its founding, and that is impressive, right? But it is still not necessarily serving the purpose and the makeup of what Bitcoin was, right? It is not part of the creation cycle of what Bitcoin means to people and what it can do to people, besides just being this what you might call a speculative, a highly speculative and highly risky asset class, right? Sort of reminiscent of when we had the high yield bonds, right? So this is something that we really have to take into consideration. Now, why is it that Craig Wright is possibly Satoshi? Well, the obvious part, I think, is that it would seem that Craig Wright is trying to keep the original idea of Satoshi going, right? And that is where it's actually usable as something and not this gambling asset. He wants it to be used as a money, right? He explains it as something that has this use where it is kind of run and created through enterprises that wish to facilitate the data centers, and a great parting away from the idea that it's everybody's a bank and everyone's a wallet. I think in Craig Wright's vision of the white paper and where he's going with this is those type of concepts weren't part of what Satoshi was putting together, right? He uses terms like peer-to-peer e-cash systems, right? He uses terminology like, this being this internet money, this digital currency. And the Bitcoiner today has a varying different messages composed in with that. So let's talk about, the some of the indicators here of why I think Craig Wright could be Satoshi and why it does make a little more sense. So he wants to keep the original vision going. If you're a person who is a creator of something, right, you probably don't want to veer from the origins of it. Similar to if an author writes a book and it's adopted into a Hollywood movie, and the Hollywood movie changes many aspects of that book due to budget constraints. He doesn't really want that. He wants that book to be, and that adaptation to be, as close to the source material as possible, right? In Craig Wright's case, that would seem to be the case. The other part is that Craig Wright seems to know a great deal of information off the cuff. He seems to always be in the right place at the right time. He seems to be knowing the right people around cryptocurrency. Those people working with him, the early days of Roger Ver, Bitcoin Jesus, calling him Satoshi. Positioning himself well, being able to then launch a Bitcoin fork that is as valuable as many other top 10 cryptocurrencies. That to me isn't coincidence. It's not accidental. And it was served that it's likely Craig Wright was one of the people in the room. He talks about being friends with a lot of these people who were connected and perceived to be Satoshi, doing work for him, working on projects with them. Also bearing in mind, Satoshi could be a group of people, which by default could make Craig Wright. Technically Satoshi, the group of Satoshi, but the reason it kind of veers me back to Craig is more likely Satoshi again is that if that were the case and there were some type of pact between a group of Satoshyites, right, a group called Satoshi, then it probably would follow the members of that pact, once one violated that pact, would want to speak out against the other, try to discredit them, come after them, or just tell the truth about the entire thing, which has not happened as of yet. So it seems like Craig Wright is a person who knows a great deal. He knows what everything is going on to the point he can make the claim, not be significantly challenged, not be worried about the actual Satoshi coming back and doing something to prove he's not Satoshi. None of those things has happened, which means that Craig Wright either is Satoshi or he knows Satoshi. In any event, it still puts him in the category of a great possibility of him being Satoshi, right? The other part is, what would be the payoff? So you look at someone like Craig Wright, and one issue is that if you were part of some elaborate scam, as he's been told he is, then I would imagine that a lot of the issue would be monetarily, right? I don't think it's very helpful to Craig Wright at this point or his project to be running at heads with the cryptocurrency community. In other words, it could be just a great deal more easier for Craig Wright to play along, get better, and just create the Bitcoin Satoshi Vision product and just simply have it be a well-performing cryptocurrency in the top 10, being worth billions of dollars. So it doesn't follow logically to me that in the idea of it just being some elaborate scam or him being some hoax or him just seeking money, that he would need to pursue that route to get money, right? It would seem to me also that he hasn't displayed a great deal of desire for money, and that he could have put together many situations and schemes within his own development to draw a lot more money than he has, right? He seems to be kind of sticking to the idea of trying to follow along with what he believes to be the actual vision or of the original Satoshi, or potentially him, and following along those lines. And again, I'm not trying. I'm not a Craig Wright fan. I'm not a Bitcoin Satoshi Vision shield. I don't have any. My product is on the Bitcoin Satoshi Vision chain, but it is as well on many other chains, right? We're a universal bridge cryptocurrency, so we don't have any allegiance to any community in cryptocurrency, and so it's not about that, but it's about us having all the information, and of course, with the more information we have, I think it's going to be a better journey for us in cryptocurrency. Looking at the personal life of Craig Wright and looking into the type of personality I think it would take to be a person like Satoshi, to be smart and to be have this type of vision. I think a person like that would be a very special person, and part of the situation is that we find many special people throughout history that have certain conditions that contribute to their genius. And it was unbeknownst to me. I could kind of sense something wrong in Craig Wright's body language, but I always dismissed it as him just being a jerk. But, he talked about he suffers from Asperger's, right? And we know that this is a condition that produces many genius level people. And it also could describe or explain a lot of his body language, where it looks like his story and how he's speaking about things and how he's reacting to things. His condition could explain a lot of what we might see as lies and body language and many other things with that. So I also think that kind of goes into not any kind of solid evidence or anything like that, but I think it would help to tell a good story about why Craig Wright could be Satoshi. Another thing is that someone like Satoshi, right? And this is another thing I don't want to get into, because this is part of the entire argument of the interview, that we have romanticized Satoshi and created an image of our own on Satoshi that we wanted there to exist. And that is something people often do times, right? People in history, we romanticize them into characters who are these benevolent people, who are these people who are fighting against the machine, fighting for our rights, for justice. And to have someone like Craig Wright be unveiled as Satoshi would destroy that narrative. But let's take a step back for a moment. Let's just consider, what if Satoshi isn't exactly that type of person, right? What if he just wanted to create a product that people used and performed the service and we got some use out of it, and that was it, that it wasn't this huge mantra about being free from government so much, or being free from oppression or anything to that degree? Could we envision, could such an inventor of Bitcoin exist like that? And whereas the early days of Bitcoin, I think many of the early narratives about Bitcoin made a lot of sense. That it was a great home for the anarchists and some type of justice from our economy. But as we move ever closer to what Bitcoin has become and what it is, I think we're starting to understand here that Bitcoin has become something that is used heavily now by institutions. It's guided and controlled more and more by banks, that nations might start to get involved with it, that it's under a lot of legal control, that it is private but not anonymous, and that many of the ideas that are floating around about Bitcoin are false narratives, right? That they aren't true, right? And we see that more and more as Bitcoin advances more and more over the last decade. Part of the issue is, I think, we don't want to face that or admit that because it's painful, right? It's painful to lose your faith in something. But the reality of the situation is, not only has proof been found, but many stories have surfaced about Bitcoin being owned and controlled by MasterCard, Visa, Bitcoin being connected to the Federal Reserve, Bitcoin possibly being part of the CIA, Bitcoin being controlled by Russia, this, that, and the other, you name it. There is a story about Bitcoin with trails of evidence that point to something isn't right. But let's just take an even more realistic approach about what Bitcoin could actually be, and why, if someone created Bitcoin and they did have a different idea about it, and Bitcoin was taken over, why they would want to create another version of it, and why they would want to break away from it, right? And that being that, in a very simple way to look at this, first of all, if global currencies of the world was challenged by anything or anyone, they would be seen as global security threats, national security threats, and it is very likely that there will be actions taken. Now, you look at something like Bitcoin that's been pumping up and dying, and it's taken over a decade for it to gain value. It was times it was at 1 cent, it was time it was at $100, it was time it was at $500. This is very easy for governments can gain control of, black ops operations to get control of, many people to get control of it, and more likely the government agencies would see these threats decades in advance, right? So they probably saw any potential threat of Bitcoin 10 years ago, right, and probably acted in. It is likely that if something like that happened, that a lot of the story and a lot of the out there about Bitcoin would change. And so if you were an original founder, probably some of your options would be to create a new Bitcoin to fight the existing idea of that existing Bitcoin. And so in that way, we have Craig Wright doing exactly that, where he's talking about that happening with Bitcoin, right? And him having to do something else. He's talking about why Bitcoin should be used and not collected, right? What is the use of Bitcoin? What is it really used for, right? People say they can buy things with Bitcoin. How many vendors accept Bitcoin, right? There are many setbacks in holding something, making it into a store of value. Why are you doing that? You're doing that because the store of value part is counter to the monetary currency part because you're holding it and you're not circulating it, right? That's not good because the less and less you use that, the less and less uses can become out of that. Keep in mind that Bitcoin hasn't proven itself like gold and has had centuries to be used as in semiconductors, to be used to make jewelry, to be used in religious ceremonies, right? It hasn't had that history. So for Bitcoin to jump directly to something like that feels more schemy and scammy and pyramid-like than more realistic to the use and function. And this is just the economic reality of the situation. You know, it is not that it's debatable. Now, I know some people argue, well, a lot of people believe and have faith it has value, but nothing really trumps use, though, does it? And so for Craig Wright to be saying, hey, look, I'm Satoshi, and this was meant to be this basically e-cash system, this electronic payment system, this digital currency, and it not being used in any shape or form, really, to the best degree in that fashion, kind of helps to support the view that he is that. All right. Getting into hard, solid evidence, you know, the reality of the situation is we're going to always go back to why doesn't he just move the funds out of the wallet? Is it time locked? What's going on here? Why is this trouble with the climate in the state? Why is there trouble, you know, with all these things with the patents and the legalities involved with it? And whereas Craig has made some grounds legally, he still seems that there are a lot of things that don't make sense about what's going on here. And I guess that would have to go back to there could be a situation where, again, there's more than one Satoshi, that it was a group, and maybe it could have been that someone like Craig Wright and Kleiman were actually Satoshi, and once members began to die off of the Satoshi team, the remaining members become Satoshi officially, right? And maybe the pack was, you know, the surviving member inherits or is in control of that wallet. You know, provided that things are done that in order with whatever that agreement is, right? And I know that's some speculation there, but it does kind of make quite a bit of sense in relation to what Craig Wright had said about certain trusts, and certain agreements and certain arrangements, right, to fit that narrative. And although I won't go deep into that, I think a lot of this will be brought up, a lot of information will be brought up if you watch that video with Valuetainment. I'll try to leave a link in the description. That I do think these are things that we really need to think about Bitcoin, right? Correct, right? Saying Bitcoin won't hit 100,000, right? It won't hit. It won't go to those type of levels, right? It won't even do a 10x. And you know, looking at that way, I'm led to believe that he's probably right in many ways, and a lot of how I see it is related to the idea that Bitcoin isn't really used for anything, right? It is the speculation and casino and gambling, and that's all it really amounts to when we get to the end of it, and that's a problem, right? That's a huge problem. You know, a currency is used every day; it holds value. The U.S. dollar, things like that. And Bitcoin just isn't that. So if it is not that, then what is it? And it doesn't translate well when we get into ideas of the store of value, as many questions become to the forefront. But I would encourage you to watch that video on value tainment. We'll try to leave a link in the description. I want to kind of link over to Hex Coin in relation to this and just kind of tie this in with this and go a little bit further. All right, so we move on from the most hated man in crypto to potentially the most hated project in cryptocurrency, and that's Hexcoin. Now, the reason I just thought this was interesting to tie in Hexcoin in with this conversation is, Rob, a lot of people know I've spoken about Hexcoin. I don't speak about it much anymore, but when it first launched, I was talked about it a lot, and I like the concept of Hexcoin. The reason I really stopped talking about Hexcoin was because Hexcoin became something I didn't want it to become. When Hexcoin was following the idea of forks like Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin Satoshi's vision, which in my mind I identified it as, when it jumped away from that, Hexcoin really lost me, and I haven't spoke about it much, and I still got some Hex, but I don't really talk about the future of Hex anymore because I'm no longer really a fan of Hexcoin, and I know that doesn't sit well with a lot of the Hexcoin community that I've talked about and I've supported. And whereas I do still feel there is a silver lining to this, I do still feel from an investment perspective and standpoint that you're going to make money from Hex, right? You're going to make money from Hex. I think that Hex falls into the same trappings as Bitcoin, and that's why I propose that Hex is the new Bitcoin. In fact, it's not only the new Bitcoin, but it's a much better designed Bitcoin. How Bitcoin is presented nowadays from its original vision is that Bitcoin is a store of value, right? It's just like this high interest blockchain certificate of deposit, right? That Hexcoin talks about, because the reality of the situation is they are the same thing, because you can do about the same thing with them and not much else. And because of that, Hexcoin not only facilitates the service need of Bitcoin, but I think Hexcoin is just better designed at it. And what do I mean by that? Well, you look at something like Hexcoin, it's on Ethereum. Ethereum, as far as smart contracts go and more usefulness to a cryptocurrency, makes more sense than trying to build something on Bitcoin or use Bitcoin for anything. You can use Ethereum blockchain for a lot of things, a lot of smart contracts that I think will be useful going into the future, right? Can't do that with Bitcoin. You do it with Hexcoin, right? You build stuff with Hexcoin. You can, Rob. They have this staking mechanism that is just better for if you're a trader and a person who's just speculating on a very speculative, high risk investment. And right, you can see when people are going to sell, right? These are all components that make this a better means to do this, right? And so I think Hexcoin does that well as well. Hexcoin is very low. So when you get into, if I'm investing in something to use it only as a store of value, I want it to go up 100x, 1,000x, a million x. And I think we're at a point with Bitcoin now where that's just unrealistic. I mean, it would be crazy if Bitcoin just 10x. And you're talking about store value crypto projects that have a certain designs and have a certain price floor where it becomes easier for them to do 20x, 50x, 100x, 1000x, million x. And they're designed to do especially that. The other difference is something like Hexcoin, unlike Bitcoin, didn't start off not wanting to be one thing and then community coming along later and it decided to be something else. Hexcoin started knowing what it wanted to be and it's going in that direction to be just that. And so I think a lot of money will be made with Hex at some point in the future. Now, do I think Hex will ever be something of use to people on a significant scale and level? No, I do not. I don't think Hex is going to be that. I think Hex is going to falter a great deal after that, much like Bitcoin is. So I think what Hexcoin has done, it has created the same future individuality as Bitcoin, and that's my take on that. As I conclude, I would